Good afternoon, morning, evening, depending on where you are. My name is Sydney Yeager, and I'm the public programs producer at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I am so pleased to welcome you to today's program, Jewish Culinary Heritage in Spain, the 13th century to today. Here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. Thank you so much for joining us today virtually. We hope that if you are able to, that you will visit the museum in person to see our current exhibitions, including Courage to Act Rescue in Denmark, the museum's first exhibition for visitors ages 9 and up. You can learn more about our current exhibitions on our website. Closed captions are available on today's program, and instructions on how to turn captions on or off are posted in the chat. If you have questions for our speaker during the program, please put them in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. Today, we are honored to be joined by Hélène Jawhara Piñer. Hélène holds a doctoral degree in medieval history and the history of food. Her main research interest is the medieval culinary history of Spain through inter and multiculturalism, with a special focus on the Jewish culinary heritage until the early modern period. She is the author of the historical cookbook Sephardi, Cooking the History, Recipes of the Jews of Spain and the Diaspora from the 13th century to today. She has also published Jews, Food, and Spain, the oldest medieval Spanish cookbook, and the Sephardic culinary heritage. Her forthcoming cookbook, Matzah and Flowers, Recipes from the History of the Sephardic Jews, will be available in fall 2024. So Hélène, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us today. And now I'm going to hand things off to Hélène.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. I'm very happy and very proud to be part of this program. It's always a pleasure, in fact, to talk about my research, to talk about my books, and to talk about Jewish history, because I think that maybe it is even the better moment to talk about Jewish history and the relevance of the facts that happened in Jewish history. And to talk about this, we are going, in fact, to talk about Jewish history using food as a tool to understand Jewish history and the practices of the Jews of Spain, so the Sephardim, and the practices of the Jewish conversos in the diaspora, so from the 13th century to today. So to talk about this, I'm going to share my PowerPoint, so it will be easier. So let's start with this. So as Cindy just told previously, I'm an historian. I'm a PhD in history. I did my research at the University of Tours in France, and I am also teaching there and in Bordeaux-Montaigne in the south of Spain, of France, where I am currently living. Today, we're going to talk about the relation between Jews and food. Obviously, it's a love relationship. We cannot talk about Jewish practices if we are not talking about Jewish food consumption, and we cannot talk about food without talking about Jewish practices. So the goal of the talk today is to present this topic using my research and my books, so Sephardi Cooking the History and Jews, Food, and Spain, to highlight the construction and evolution of the food of the Jews on the long term. Because if we want to understand the evolution of Jewish food practices, we really have to work on the long term. We cannot understand the evolution only working on 1 century or even 2 centuries. We cannot do this. This would be a big mistake. And then we are going to talk about how the history of Spain, and mainly during the Inquisition period, shaped the culinary practices of the Jewish conversos. So let's start, and I hope you like the session. So this is my book, Sephardi Cooking the History. This is the first cookbook historical cookbook I wrote. It's part of my PhD, but it's a cookbook. So this is the first one I published. The second one is this one, Jews, Food, and Spain, the oldest medieval Spanish cookbook and the Sephardic culinary heritage. This is part of my PhD. And this is the book we are almost talking about during this session. Jews, Food, and Spain has the main source I have been working on to write Jews, Food, and Spain and my PhD is this one. This is, in fact, the manuscript, part of the manuscript. It's, in fact, the beginning of the manuscript of the first cookbook we know about, and of the Western part, and it has been written in Arabic, obviously, as you can see in the slide. And it bears the name of the Kitab al-Tabikh, obviously in Arabic, which means the Kitab means the book, and Tabikh means the cuisine. It's an Andalusian cookbook, so it has been written under Muslim domination in the south of Spain, which is called nowadays Andalusia, and it dates back to the 13th century. So I spent 2 years of my PhD only working on this source, which is in fact the most important source when we are working on the culinary heritage of the Jews, of the Western part of the world. I'm going to tell you why just a bit after. This is another source. I've been working on it as well. It is called the Fudalat al-Hiwan. It's the second Andalusian cookbook written in the 13th century, but a few decades after the Kitab al-Tabikh, so the oldest medieval cookbook. But the big difference is that we know that this one has been written by Ibn Razim al-Tujibi, and we know about this author, so it's not anonymous, and this author was Muslim. The third manuscript, the third cookbook we know, and which has been written during the medieval period, is called the Saint-Sauvy. So it's a cookbook, but it has been written in Catalan and dates back to the 14th century. It has been written in northern eastern Spain. And the main difference is that it has been written under Christian domination. So the recipes it contains are totally at the opposite of what we can find, of the recipes we can find in the cookbook written in Arabic under Muslim domination. There are other differences, but this is the main one. So as we are talking about the construction and the evolution of Jewish cuisine and Jewish food practices since the 13th century, I thought it was a good idea to write this cookbook like a book that mirrors history. So the first chapter, the first part, in fact, of this book deals with the Jews' place in the construction of an Andalusian cuisine. So it starts with, in fact, in the 12th century and goes to the 14th century. This cookbook, this book, Jews, Food, and Spain, highlights the complexities of the complex realities of Spain, and not only concerning food practices, but also concerning the political and religious contexts. This part highlights the Kitab al-Tabikh, so the oldest medieval cookbook, as a way to understand Jewish history, because it has explicitly Jewish recipes. It also underscores the Jewish and Muslims' food habits and cooking practices. And obviously, we are going to talk about the eggplant, because it is the more iconic food of the Jews of Spain and the Sephardic broadly. So let's start with this source. Why I decided to start my research in the 13th century in Spain. In fact, this is because, as I told previously, the oldest medieval cookbook that contains explicitly Jewish recipes is this cookbook. It is totally anonymous. This cookbook has 462 recipes of dishes, because it has also recipes for making soap or perfumes, but it has only 462 recipes of dishes. And among those recipes, 462 recipes, we can find explicitly 6 Jewish recipes. When I say explicitly Jewish recipes, I say that in the title of the recipe, the word Yehudi, is written. So this is fascinating, because I would like to remind you that during the 13th century, in fact, the 13th century was maybe in Spain the worst period under Muslim domination, not under Christian dominations, because then came the Inquisition in the 15th century. But under Muslim domination, the 13th century was maybe the worst period for the Jews who were living there. Why? Because, in fact, the dogmatic dynasty of the Almohads came to rule the country, and they had a very, very dogmatic vision of Islam. So it was the Islam of the Tawhid, so the Islam of the revelation. So it was very hard for the Jews who were living there. That's why, for example, in the 12th century, Maimonides, the Rambam, had to flee Spain and to settle in other countries. But he was not the only one, because also Muslims that were not did not practice Islam as the dogmatic dynasty saw Islam, so they also had to leave the country, to leave Spain, to leave Sepharad. So this oldest medieval Spanish cookbook contains 6 explicitly recipes. Those 6 explicitly Jewish recipes, among those 6 explicitly Jewish recipes, we have 2 recipes made with chicken. In the first one, the chicken is stuffed, and in the second one, it's a whole chicken. We have 2 recipes with partridge, and in the first one, the partridge is stuffed, and in the second one, it's a whole partridge. And we have the 2 last Jewish recipes are a stuffed buried Jewish dish. So it's in Arabic, lun yehudi, mahshum atfun. It's a very interesting and delicious recipe, which looks like a big cake. I'm gonna show you the picture in the next slide. And the last one, it's a dish made with eggplant, indeed. A Jewish dish of eggplants stuffed with meat. So thanks to, in fact, it is a fact to find those explicitly Jewish recipes in a cookbook, or that, in fact, allows me to understand that we have to think about, in fact, that the 13th century is the starting point to work on the Jewish heritage of the Jews of Spain, because before the 13th century, we do not have any recipes, or we do not have evidences concerning special food practices from the Jews who were living in Spain. I just remind you that we have evidences concerning the presence. So Jews that were living in Spain since the second century, thanks to graves that we found in Andalusia, so in the south of Spain. So this is interesting, but nevertheless, we do not have information concerning Jewish practices that date back to this century, so the second century. The first evidences of the existence of a Jewish cuisine, so a cuisine that food practices, Jewish food practices, only dates back to the 13th century. But this does not mean, obviously, because Jews had, as other communities, had to eat just to survive. So indeed, they were eating. But the first evidences of the existence of a Jewish cuisine dates back to the 13th century. This is an example of what one of the recipe looks like. So I just choose to share with you the recipe called a Jewish dish of chicken. So as you can see, it's quite super easy to understand. In Arabic, it's not super hard to understand as well, because the recipes that appear in the cookbook are not very well written in Arabic, so it's quite easy to understand. So as you can read in English, the recipe says, clean the chicken and pound its entrails with walnuts, breadcrumbs, a little flour, salt, and cut up fennel and cilantro. Beat it with 6 eggs and the amount of a quarter rattle. This is a measurement of water. Then expose the chicken over the fire and a little and place it in a clean pot with 5 spoons of fresh oil. It was in fact olive oil. And do not stop turning it on the fire in the oil until it is well browned. Then cover the contents of the pot with stuffing prepared earlier and leave it until it is bound together and wrinkled. Ladle it out and put the stuffing around it. Garnish with cut rue, it's an herb, and fennel, tips of mint and toasted walnuts, and present it. So this recipe, in fact, is seems to be familiar for the people who were living in the 13th century. We did not have evidences, or we do not understand why this recipe was Jewish, because we do not have information that allows us to think that, okay, I don't know, maybe you have to slaughter the chicken or something like that. So we can maybe say that people living in Spain, not only Jewish people, were able to cook and to make this recipe. Nevertheless, we have food ingredients that are very often mentioned in Jewish recipes, not only in the 13th century, but after in the 15th, 16th century, and even today in Jewish cuisine, in Jewish Sephardic cuisine, because we have cilantro and eggs, and we also have indeed olive oil, which in fact is one of our main ingredients in our cuisine. So just to end with this slide, you can see at the top of the you have the name of the recipe. So in Arabic one can read loon. So this is in fact the dish. Min, which means with. Farouj, so it's the chicken. Yehudi, of the Jews, or Jewish chicken, Jewish dish of chicken. This is in fact the final result. You can find the recipes in my book, Sephardic Cooking, the History, but I really wanted here to show you in this slide all the 6 Jewish recipes. As you can see, they are totally different. Personally, obviously, I I used to make them. So I just wanted just to stop on the fifth one, a stuffed brewed Jewish dish. It's like, as I told you, it's like a big cake with layers of eggs. And between the layers, you have ground meat and meatballs. You also have, indeed, pine nuts and mint. So it's cooked in the pot. And then when you want to serve the dish, you just have to flip it and to sprinkle with all the nuts. The other recipe, which is in fact super interesting when we talk about Sephardic cuisine nowadays, it's the fact that the eggplants in this recipe are stuffed with meat. We can find even today, mainly in the south of Spain, but also in Northern Africa, but also in Turkey. In Turkey, we have recipes that with eggplant and other vegetables that are stuffed with meat. Let's talk about let's talk about Jewish food habits and cooking practices in the 13th century. So we are still at this point because, as I told previously, the 13th century is the century where we know about the existence of a Jewish cuisine. But mainly, maybe what is even more important, it's not only the existence of Jewish recipes in the 13th century. I mean, Jewish recipes that were written by or for the Jews. Here, what is even more maybe important is to highlight that the non-Jewish people identified those six recipes as Jewish. So here, what is important is, okay, I'm a Jew, so I know that those recipes are Jewish recipes because I used to make them. But here, the fact that the others, who were mainly Muslim, identified my recipes as Jewish, this means a lot, because this means that also the non-Jewish people, so mainly Muslims and Christians, recognized the existence of Jewish cuisine. This means a cuisine that was different from the cuisine of the Muslims and the Christians. And this is totally unique. So let's talk about what kind of food habits and cooking practices we can find in the 13th century, thanks to research we can do in the Kitab al-Tabikh, so the cookbook. What about bread? What is interesting is in this cookbook is that a lot of recipes contains bread or flour. So we have 94 recipes that contains bread. And among those 94 recipes, I have been able to identify 9 different types of bread, which is in fact a lot. This really proved that in the 13th century, flour and yeast and water that makes bread were very common and in the 13th century. The flour used to make the bread was mainly wheat flour. So this in fact highlights that bread consumption, because we know about the importance, the relevance of bread as symbolic food, you know. So what is important here is to highlight that obviously there were different kinds of bread in this recipe, but also different kinds of flour. And among those breads, we have bread that were unleavened bread. So what we nowadays call matzah. Obviously, we cannot find the word matzah in even among the recipes that use flour or unleavened bread. But we have evidences of a bread which is an unleavened bread, and it is called fatir in Arabic, and it's totally unleavened bread. So, just something about this. As Sydney just told at the beginning, for fall, I just finished my second cookbook, which is called Matzah and Flour. And in this recipe, I just highlight the importance and the relevance of bread and matzah and unleavened bread among the history of the Jews of Spain and all the diaspora. It's totally symbolical. The symbolism of bread and flour are so important in Jewish history. So what about wine and honey? What is totally interesting here is that, as I told previously, this cookbook is anonymous and has been written under Muslim domination, and not the Muslim domination of the 9th or 10th century, the Muslim domination under the 13th century, which was in fact super bad for the Jews living during this period. So, as we all know, Muslims did not and do not drink wine. So my question is, why in a cookbook written under a very dogmatic domination, why can we find recipes that contains wine? And my second question is why in some of the recipes that contains wine, one can read that the wine, you can use honey instead of wine for the good Muslims who respect Islam. In fact, this highlights the fact, because this is my theory, that in fact this cookbook, which is totally anonymous, may not have been written by a Muslim. I really think that a Jew wrote this cookbook, but he had to hide his origin and religious origin because it was super hard for him to live under this domination. So, and that's why this cookbook contains a lot of recipes that follows the dietary laws of the kashrut. I'm going to talk about this after. So let's talk about meat. What do we know concerning Jewish food practices and Jewish food habits and cooking practices in the 13th century through this cookbook? No pork. Among the 462 recipes, there is no pork in the whole cookbook, and the word pork, it's even not mentioned at all in the cookbook, which is quite crazy, because this really highlights the importance of eating only certain kinds of meat or food in general. But we can say, okay, Muslims do not eat pork either. So as the cookbook has been written under a very dogmatic domination, so that's quite logical that we cannot find recipes with pork. Indeed, you're right. But what is very interesting as well is that in some of the recipes, the recipe, the text says that if you want to make this recipe, you have to remove the tendon. The Muslims do not have to remove the tendons when they are just processing when they want to make the recipe. They do not have to remove the tendon of the meat. They do not follow any laws that make that they have to remove the tendon. They do not have any laws concerning this, only the Jews. And some of the recipes, in a lot of recipes, you have this mention of, you want to make this recipe? Okay, you have to remove the tendon. This is in fact the first thing that is written in at the beginning of the text of the recipe. Other evidence that highlights my theory is that in some of the recipes, it's written that you have to salt the meat. Muslims do not have to salt the meat. It's not required for them. But for the Jews, yes. So salting the meat obviously helps for to remove the blood of the animal, of the meat. So these are more than one evidences of the knowledge of the author concerning the laws of the kashrut. What about fat? Indeed, we do not have recipes that contain lard, but as we just told previously, Muslims also do not eat lard. But what about olive oil? A lot of recipes highlight the consumption of olive oil in their recipes. Muslims use fat, they use olive oil, but they mainly used both olive oil, but rancid butter, something that the Jews do not use, or did not use, but do not use either nowadays. And what about eggplants? We talked a bit, I mentioned this, the eggplant just at the beginning. Eggplant is, and still was, and still is nowadays, the more iconic food of the Sephardi, because it has a very special history, a very special relation with Jewish history. It's not only a vegetable. It has been a tool to identify and to mock Jewish practices and also the physique of the Jews, thanks to what we know through literature and poems. So it's not only a food; it has been a political tool. So that's also a good moment to. It could be also a good moment to talk about food and politics. So, yes. So as I just said, eggplant has been used as a tool to identify Jewish practices. In the Kitab al-Tabir, that's what I just explained with more details in my book, Jews, Food and Spain. Eggplant in the Kitab al-Tabir is often mentioned because, and we know about this because eggplants are part of a whole chapter in the cookbook, which is totally unique. It's more than 36 recipes only with eggplants, different kinds of eggplants, different kinds of dishes with 3 kinds of eggplant. And eggplant is not only eggplant. I say that because, for example, we have in the cookbook a recipe that should have contained rabbit. We all know that Jewish people, the observant Jewish people, do not eat rabbit. So, but Muslims can eat rabbit. No problem with this. Nevertheless, one can explain me why, for example, in a recipe called the dish of rabbit, which indeed it is supposed to contain rabbit, rabbit meat, in fact, it does not contain rabbit. It contains eggplant. So if Muslims can eat rabbit, so why could we find a recipe that do not contain rabbit meat, but instead it contains eggplant? In fact, the versatility of the eggplant has been used for making some of the dishes. So thanks to the color and thanks to the peel of the eggplant, one was able to shape the dish as if it was meat, but in fact, it was eggplant. Let's talk about Jewish holidays. Jewish holidays shaped For me, they are the reason why food practices are so important in Jewish history. And thanks to the celebration of Jewish holidays, there is a permanence of Jewish practices. The celebration of the Jewish holidays related to certain Jewish food practices helped to this transmission to nowadays, from the 13th century to nowadays. Because then I'm going to talk about some of the recipes in the Kitab al-Tabikh that are not, because I did not tell you about this, but indeed, we have explicitly 6 Jewish recipes in the Kitab al-Tabikh, so the oldest medieval Spanish cookbook that contains explicitly Jewish recipes. But this does not mean that there was no other Jewish recipes in the cookbook. There are 6 explicitly Jewish recipes, but one can find other recipes that were prepared by the Jews in the 13th century. But the word Yehudi is not mentioned in the title of the recipe. The context explains why. So what about Jewish holidays? In the cookbook, one cannot find references concerning Jewish holidays. It was very dangerous to do this. So Shabbat and Passover were the 2 main Jewish celebrations one can find when it's time to talk about Jewish food practices. Kippur, Purim, Sukkot, and Hanukkah are also mentioned, but not for the same reason. So Shabbat and Passover are totally related to certain Jewish food practices, and that's why they are mostly mentioned in different kinds of sources, and mainly in the sources of the Inquisition. So I have to go a bit faster. So what is the Inquisition? The Inquisition has been created by the Catholics monarchs Isabel de Castilla and Fernando de Aragon. So they created, it was mainly Isabel de Castilla, they created the Inquisition, the court of the Inquisition, because they really wanted to erase the converso practices. What we call converso were the Jews who officially said, okay, I officially converted to Christianity, but in fact, I'm going to keep my Jewish practices. So that's what we call them converso. So the Inquisition did not like this at all. So the Inquisition wanted totally to erase the converso practices. So in 1478, they created the Inquisition court and the Inquisition trials. So as we can see on the right, this is one of, this one is quite well written. It's easy to read. This one has been written at the end of the 15th century. So in 1484, just keep in mind that the first Inquisition, the first proceso, so the first trial, was in 1481, and this court was in Sevilla, so which is in fact the main town, the capital of Andalusia nowadays. So this fact, it's more like what we can very often just see as a trial. I would like to talk about so evolution of the Jewish food practices. Indeed, food has been a tool, used as a tool to identify Jewish practices. So the converso Jews had to hide their culinary, first they had to hide themselves, They had to hide their practices, their religious practices, but also they had to hide their culinary practices. And this was super hard for them, because when it was time to celebrate Shabbat, as Shabbat is weekly, they had to hide their practices, and it was super hard for them just to say, okay, how can I do? I have to cook my pot, I have to cook my dish before sunset on Friday, but nobody can know about this, because if they saw that I'm not adding something to the pot after sunset, and then I'm not cooking on Saturday, so they're gonna think that, okay, I'm Jewish. So they really had to hide their practices. But nevertheless, this did not work, because a lot of Jewish families has been identified and condemned and burnt because of their food practices, because they have been identified for their cooking practices. In Jewish Inquisition trials, this is the huevos chamados, or what we call nowadays huevos chaminados for the Sephardim, are one of the dishes that is mentioned a lot in Inquisition trials. Huevos chamados are eggs that are cooked in a saucepan with the peel of the onions. And it cooks the huevos chamados cooked for at least between 4 and 6 or more hours, and then it becomes totally brown, and the white inside is also brown, and it's totally delicious. This is the contents of the cookbook. Let's talk quickly about this recipe. This was totally discovery. I think I discovered this dish in the second year of my PhD. If you have a look, even quickly, to the title, Murakaba. This doesn't mean anything. This means, in fact, Murakaba means composed. We understand this because this is a dish, a sweet dish, that is composed of different kinds of layers of dough. The Sephardim from Morocco know very well this dish. This dish, I have been able to identify this dish thanks to the process of making the dish. In fact, it's quite easy. It's a dough made with flour and salt and yeast and water, indeed. Then you have to knead the dough, and you have to make like small balls. You have to flatten the balls, and you have to put one in a pan, in fact, in a skillet, in a cast iron skillet. You have to cook it, and once it's cooked, you have to flip it and to put another layer of dough, and then you have to flip both, and then to put a third one, and you have to flip the three. And this makes what we call nowadays mufleta. Mufleta is a dish that we do for to celebrate Mimuna, so the end of Passover. Thanks to this, and this is a recipe from the 13th century. So this proves that, in fact, the Jews of Spain in the 13th century already used to celebrate the end of Passover. But as one can see, the word Yehud or Yehudi, so Jewish or Jew, is not mentioned in the recipe. But nowadays, only the Sephardim from Morocco make the murakaba for Mimuna. So this proves that there are other Jewish recipes in the Kitab al-Tabir, even if the word Jewish or Jew is not mentioned in the title. But this is totally understandable, concerning, as we just take into account, the very hard context during which the Jews were living in the 13th century and after. This is a recipe of a stuffed brewy Jewish dish. I just taught you about this previously. This is another recipe that we all know, even more because it was Hanukkah. We all know about this dish. This is also part of the culinary heritage of the Jews of Spain and the diaspora, because nowadays it's one of the most important street food of the Moroccans, but not only Jewish Moroccans, but also the Muslims who are living in Morocco. But the difference is that the Moroccan Jews make sponge, which is in fact a derivation of soufganot. And this sponge is like a big donut. And this sponge dates back to the 13th century. And we can, nowadays, we are still eating for Hanukkah the sponge. I'm just gonna finish with this. This is the more iconic slow-cooked chickpea and beef stew of the Sephardim. This dish, adafina, is the only dish that is mentioned in all the Inquisition trials. In the Inquisition trials, we have references concerning dishes that contains, okay, that kind of food or chickpea or beef, but sometimes, in fact, we do not have a name for the dish. But adafina is very special because this is the only dish that really bears a name in the Inquisition trial. And we can find the word adafina also in dictionaries of the 17th century. But adafina already existed before. And it is the more Shabbat dish of the Sephardim in the 14th, 15th century, but also nowadays. There are a lot of chickpeas and beef and vegetables, and it's totally delicious. I really love this. So I'm so sorry. I hope I did not go too fast. I have a lot of things to do because I'm totally fascinated about this topic indeed. And I hope you will find all your answers in my book, Jews, Food in Spain, and the other one, Sephardic Cooking, the History, published with Academic Studies Press. But you can also find me on social media, but I also have a website. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Hélène, I want to thank you for that really amazing presentation. I learned so much, and I know our audience did as well. So yeah, if you all have questions, you can continue to put them in the Zoom Q&A, but I want to start with a question of my own, which I know might be a little hard to answer, but I'm wondering, like, out of all the recipes that you showed and maybe some that you haven't shown, what is your favorite, maybe to cook, and also maybe because of the history of it?
Oh, that's interesting. I like the second part of your question. I mean, the recipe I really like because it is totally related to history. Adafina is not my favorite dish, but if I link it to the history, it becomes my favorite dish because people have been burnt for making it. Mm-hmm. So indeed, when I make adafina, it tastes very special, because I'm still here. So I think that for its relation with history, I would say adafina. But then my favorite dish, I really like, it's quite hard, your question, but I really like those eggplant croquettes that I used to eat for Hanukkah as well. But also hojuelas, because this really highlights that the Sephardic diaspora is totally used, because we can find hojuelas in Argentina, but Jews in Argentina used to make hojuelas for Purim. Mm-hmm. We also make, as Sephardim from Spain, we make hojuelas for Purim as well, but we can make them also for Kippur. So these are my two favorite dishes.
Thank you. And yeah, I know it's probably very hard to choose. So I
yes.
giving it a good try. So we have a question that just came in. Are many or any of the recipes that you shared and that are in your book, are any adaptable to gluten-free cooking?
It depends. Some do not use any grains or any flour, so it would be easy for gluten-free. Yes, you have some recipes that do not contain flour or wheat. So it could say you also have recipes with chickpea flour. So I assume that gluten-free people can eat chickpea flour, I think. So, or rice flour. But chickpea flour, yes, I have a recipe called chickpea croquettes, which is, I have 2 in the cookbook. Delicious. One of my favorite as well.
Oh, amazing. Thank you. So in your studies, did you I know that in other cultures, there are sort of special cooking vessels or utensils that they use. Did you find that Jews in your study or in any of your research, is there any special cooking vessels or utensils that were used in the cooking in the eras that you're discussing?
Maybe I could say, but I don't think it's very special. Concerning the tools that were used, we have a lot of interesting references concerning the fact that the cook must cook the dish in a new pot. So we can assume that it was for Passover, for example, but we can also think, okay, so if a pot has been used previously and the dish burnt, so it's going to give a very bad taste. So that's why it is required to use a new one. But nevertheless, I am really keep thinking about the fact that using a new pot was a way to say, okay, it's Passover, so let's use a new pot. But I did not find a lot of references concerning special tools. It seems that they have like a pot that was just what they say matfun. In fact, this means buried. So you have to just it has to be cooked on the bottom, but also on the top of the pot. So it's like you have to seal the pot, to close it, and over they put some other stuff that allows the dish to roast on the top. But I did not find nowadays tools that like this one. It's only a process, a cooking process.
Thank you so much. So we had another question that came in. Can you review the differences in food between the 13th century Andalusian cookbooks and the 14th century Catalonian cookbooks?
Oh, it's super easy. Nothing to do. So why? Because this proves that eating is a religious and political affair. Even in the 13th, 14th century. What I can say is that if you have a look to the 13th century cookbook, you have no pork, you have no lard, you have a lot of eggplants, you have a lot of vegetarian dishes, you have a lot of medical recommendations. In fact, for almost each dish, the author, which I think was a Jewish doctor, the author says, okay, this dish is more if you do not feel well. This dish is more for pregnant women. This dish is more for, so you have all those characteristics. If you have a look into the Catalan one, so it's only in less than 1 century after. It's totally different. No medical references, a lot of lard, a lot of pork, not a lot of vegetables, no eggplant at all, almost no. The Catalan one, I think it has, I think 2 recipes of eggplant. But if you have a look, I have been studying 11 cookbooks that has been written at the. In fact, they are the first cookbook written in Spanish, and they date back to the 15th century, 16th century. I've been studying 11 ones, and I think that among the more than 1,000 recipes, I found 3 recipes with eggplant. No cilantro, a lot of parsley. So the main differences concerns the meat, the lard, and this is in fact the main one, the main differences, but nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do.
Thank you. And sort of a similar question that came in, but did you find any differences between Jewish cuisine in Andalusia and in the north, like in Zaragoza and Calatayud? I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I apologize.
Calatayud, yes, Calatayud. It's northern east. So if I found connection between Andalusian cuisine
Connections or any differences between the two regions.
Okay, so what I can say is that there are a lot of differences, indeed, because in fact, we have to keep in mind that the Jews settled in the south of Spain, but also everywhere, because when the context was super hard for them, under Muslim domination in the 12th, 13th, 14th century, what they did, the Jews went to the north. They followed Christians. But then when the Christians' domination was too hard for them because the Inquisition started in the 15th century, the Jews had to find a way to settle, where to settle, and it was super hard. So, in comparison, even the South Andalusia was under Muslim domination until the 15th century. But the North and Calatayud in Catalonia was under Christian domination since the 8th century. This is a big difference because when the Christians started to rule the country, they also did it. They also started to erase all the Semitic culture. I mean, Muslim and Jewish culture. So, and they started to rule the country using also food as a way to unify the region. Nevertheless, we have in the Saint-Sauvy, so the cookbook of the 14th century, a recipe which is called albergines, which means eggplant, and it's like it's a dish with eggplant, but we also have a dish called, I have it in Sephardi, my cookbook, which is called al-madrok. And al-madrok is, in fact, what nowadays us, the Sephardi, prepare. It's like a dip made with boiled eggplant or roasted eggplant. It depends of the taste you want to give to the dish. It's like a dip. So we add olive oil, we add crushed garlic, and we add like cheese, hard cheese. I'm gonna show you, it's very delicious. And we eat this with, it is this. So it's called eggplant al modrote, eggplant, garlic, and cheese dip. And really, honestly, I really love, maybe this is one of my favorites as well. So yes, so this is a recipe that was found in the 13th century cookbook in Arabic, but that we can also find in Catalonia in the 14th century. So this proved that the Jewish food habits follow the move of the Jews. When the Jews went to settle in the north of Spain, so they brought their food practices and they brought so to Catalonia. But this also happened in all the diaspora, not only to Catalonia.
Thank you. And I'm glad we found another exciting recipe for you to talk about. So I know that we are at the end of our time, and I apologize if we weren't able to get to your questions, but thank you all for sending them in. But I do want to end with one last one. Can you just talk about what was the most surprising or exciting thing that you found when you were researching for any of your books, and including the one that is upcoming?
I think that the one which was totally I was really totally crazy when I discovered the recipe of the mufleta, so murakaba, so the recipe of the layers, because the process of making mufleta is so special. There is no recipes that there is no comparison with other kind of recipe. And nowadays, it's just crazy because nowadays the Sephardim from Morocco to celebrate Mimuna, so the end of Passover, exactly use the same process. But maybe I have another one, because in this cookbook of the Kitab al-Tabikh, I discovered a bread which is in fact a braided bread made with a lot of eggs and which really, really looks exactly to challah. And this was made by the Jews of Spain in the 13th century. And if you have a look to other cookbooks of the same period, after this period, Inquisition trial, or other cookbooks that have been written in the Middle East, this is totally unique. It's a braided bread that really looks like challah. So I wrote an article on this topic. And I have the recipe in my book. Interesting. This is the one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's I have been totally fascinated about this because it's very, very special.
Amazing. Well, Hélène, I want to thank you so much for sharing all of this information with all of us for this really fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
And I want to highly encourage everyone who is on this program to buy all of your books, including the one that is coming out in fall of 2024. So please keep an eye out for it. For all of you who joined us today, if you enjoyed today's program, we hope you'll consider making a donation to support the museum at mjhnyc.org/support, and also joining us for our upcoming programs, which you can find at mjhnyc.org/current events. On Wednesday, we have a virtual walking tour of Jewish Dublin. And on Thursday, we have a live podcast recording of Person, Place, Thing, featuring Peter Rieger, the actor. You can watch past programs and view and share the recording of today's excellent program, which is going to be available later this week on our YouTube channel. So Hélène, I want to thank you so much again. I want to thank everyone who joined us. Have a great afternoon, evening, morning, depending on where you are. And we'll see. Yes,
it's 11 a.m. It's 11.
So thank you so much for staying up with us. We appreciate it. But we'll see you all soon. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.